The clinking of glasses and the chatter of laughter filled the grand hall of St. Regis, when suddenly a shrill cry tore through the air. Eleanor Vance, the wealthy matriarch of the Art Foundation, shot to her feet. Her voice cut across the room like glass shattering. "My Hermès purse! It's gone!" The sound dropped into silence. Then eyes began to search for a culprit. Eleanor's fingers stabbed the air. There, that girl. In the corner stood Amelia Washington, the only black girl in the hall, pressed against the piano. In her arms she clutched a worn-out backpack, holding it to her chest like a shield. Eleanor jerked her chin. "Why are you just standing there? Security! Hold her!" Marcus, the building's guard, stepped forward. His shoes struck the floor with slow, deliberate thuds. He crouched slightly, softening his voice. "Hey, kid, let me take a quick look in your bag. Just for a moment." Amelia shook her head. Her voice rang out, firm and clean. "No, I didn't take anything." She bit her lip, a thought flashing through her mind. "I don't need that." Whispers rippled across the hall. "She looks suspicious, or maybe just scared." Amelia lifted her head, her dark, deep eyes locking on Eleanor. Not the eyes of a thief, but of someone guarding a truth no one else yet knew. If she wasn't the thief, then what was this girl really here for? Amelia had not come here to beg for food. That afternoon, she had slipped away from the shelter. After missing the bus, she walked for miles until she stood before the lobby of the St. Regis. She came for one thing only: the Fazioli piano. On its shining brass plate were engraved the words, "Legacy of the Vance family." But in Amelia's memory, it was the sound of Betty Washington, her grandmother, the woman who taught her to count rhythm by her breath, to hear the bass note by her heartbeat. On her final night, her grandmother's rough hand rested on the back of Amelia's own. "You must promise, no matter what people say, you will play. The melody will always find its way home." And now, standing in the banquet hall, Amelia gripped the strap of her backpack and whispered softly, "Grandma, they took it away, but I found it again." That was the secret pressed against her chest. Yet in the St. Regis at this moment, all anyone saw was a child branded as a thief. The air had not yet calmed when Eleanor turned back to her circle of VIP guests, as if nothing had happened. She raised her glass, her voice honeyed. "Just a minor inconvenience. Tonight remains special. The Vance Foundation has always nurtured young talent, and tonight, my son will prove it." Behind her stood Caden Vance, 15, dressed in a fitted black suit. His palms were slick with sweat. He wiped them on his trousers once, then again. An older guest arched a brow. "Does Caden truly love the piano?" Eleanor's smile was sharp as glass. "Passion is inborn. Artistic blood runs in the Vance family. Caden will carry it forward." Caden cast a quick glance at the corner where Amelia stood. In his eyes lingered not only the disdain he had learned, but something else. Something like fear. As if he knew something he dared not speak. Eleanor lowered her voice deliberately, letting her words fall right where Amelia could hear. "Not everyone is cut out for art. We only choose the worthy." A few VIPs laughed. In the corner, Amelia remained still, clutching her backpack. No one came near. They only stared, whispered, and turned away as if the answer was already decided. To them she was nothing more than a thief yet to be cleared. The whispers had barely faded when a waiter burst in, breathless, holding a bright orange Hermès purse. "Madam Vance, your purse was left in the dressing room." The hall froze. A few chuckled under their breath. Moments ago it had been a market uproar. Now it was so quiet one could hear a sniff of irritation. Eleanor faltered for an instant, then snatched the purse. "Yes, I must have been careless." Not a word of apology. Not a trace of acknowledgement. Her painted eyes swept the room, landing squarely on Amelia. "Regardless, this place is not for strays. Marcus, take her out." Marcus scratched his neck, clearly uneasy. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Hey, kid, you heard her. Best to leave before it gets worse." Amelia did not move. Clutching her backpack tighter, she spoke clearly, her voice small but firm. "I won't go. I didn't take anything. She accused me in front of everyone. She owes me an apology." The hall gasped. "Did you hear that? She demands Mrs. Vance apologize. This kid's got nerve." Eleanor laughed, her laughter hissing through clenched teeth. "Apologize to you? Who do you think you are?" Marcus stood frozen, his hand gripping the radio at his side. He did not interfere, but his eyes flickered at the sound of her voice. But Dr. Robert Chun, the guest conductor, had been watching all along. He stepped away from the powerful crowd, tapping his cane lightly against the floor. His voice was hoarse but resonant. "Wait, Eleanor. The way this girl stands, the way her eyes linger on that piano. It feels familiar." The crowd hushed. Laughter was easy. Silence meant people were reconsidering. Eleanor curled her lip. "You're sentimental again, Robert. What would a stray know about a heritage instrument?" Chun did not answer right away. He only narrowed his eyes, watching the small hands gripping the backpack. That kind of gesture, he had seen it in children raised with the keys. No one in the hall knew who she really was. But one thing was certain. She would not leave quietly as they expected. The room buzzed after the purse was returned. Eleanor felt her grip slipping, cornered by Chun in front of her VIPs. She let out a brittle laugh. "Very well. Since Maestro Chun says you understand this instrument, then prove it." She flicked her hand. "Come on, little prodigy. Show this hall what you've got." The crowd murmured, swelling like a wave. One guest raised a curious brow. Another whistled. Then chairs scraped forward, eager for the show. A single summons pulled every gaze, and in moments, the entire room pressed toward one child. An assistant carried out a leather-bound score and placed it on the stand. Eleanor pointed directly. "This is an unpublished composition, the legacy of the Vance family. If you can read and play even the first page, the Vance Foundation will cover your tuition at any music school of your choice. But if you fail," she paused, her lip curling upward, "you will kneel and polish my son's shoes. Right here, in front of them all." A burst of laughter erupted from a corner. Some shook their heads. "That's cruel." Caden's face went pale, his voice trembling. "Mother, stop, this isn't—" "Silence!" Eleanor cut him off, her eyes never leaving Amelia. "This is when you learn how the ones beneath live." Dr. Chun moved closer, his eyes skimming the page. Dense, complex, not meant for a child. He held his breath, but he said nothing, because music always answered best with music. Amelia stepped forward. She adjusted the bench exactly half a span, placed her feet firmly and stared straight at the score. "I accept." The air froze. The hall that had been as loud as a market now fell so silent that one could hear someone swallow. One beat of silence, then another, and then the entire hall held its breath. If she had spoken only out of defiance, it would show instantly. But if she truly understood the piano, then tonight would no longer be a joke. No one knew for sure what would happen when those small hands touched the keys. But everyone felt it. A storm was waiting to break. The hall fell silent as if it had swallowed itself whole. No more laughter, no more whispers. Every eye was fixed on the frail girl walking toward the Fazioli piano. Amelia placed her backpack beside the bench. Her fingers brushed lightly across the seat, then pulled it into place. The motion was so practiced that a few guests raised their brows. One man muttered, "She sits like someone trained in music." The person beside him scoffed, "She probably picked it up somewhere. She'll slip soon enough." Amelia lowered herself onto the bench. She did not rush. She leaned down, slid the seat back half a span, then planted both feet firmly on the floor. She lifted her hands, not touching the keys yet, just hovering, as if checking the breath of a living creature. Eleanor tilted her head toward a friend, whispering loudly enough for others to hear, "Look at her putting on a show. At best, she knows some children's tunes." Caden stood nearby, lips pressed tight. He muttered, "Mother, is this really necessary?" Eleanor's eyes flashed. "Silence. You'll see." The ones at the bottom raised their heads for a few seconds, only to bow forever. The air thickened. Every breath was audible. Laughter was easy, but silence revealed who was truly waiting for something. Amelia closed her eyes. She inhaled deeply. Then her fingers fell upon the keys. The sound rang out, clear, certain, not the stumbling notes of a child in practice. It resonated like a declaration. I know what I'm doing. The hall jolted. A woman nearly choked on her wine. The score unfolded with jagged edges, cascading arpeggios like waterfalls, abrupt shifts in tempo. Those trained in music recognized it instantly. This was no simple piece. It was a genuine trial. Amelia did not falter. Her fingers danced, sometimes soaring like the wind, sometimes sinking into depths. One note, then another, then entire passages bursting forth, faster, stronger, fiercer. A guest whispered, "My God, she's really playing." Another replied, voice trembling, "Not just playing, mastering." Dr. Chun froze, eyes shut, as though hearing a voice from memory. He whispered, "Requiem for a Sparrow." Dear God, it's the Requiem for a Sparrow. That piece, I only ever heard from one woman. The crowded hall turned deathly still. Moments ago it had been chaos, now so quiet that the ragged breaths of a few could be heard. Eleanor forced a smile, but her lips quivered. She muttered to herself, "Impossible. How could she know?" Caden was different. Watching Amelia, his gaze flickered with envy, and with release, as though the burden of the entire family had just slipped from his shoulders. As the chords rang, images of her grandmother surfaced in Amelia's mind. A small room, dim yellow light, Betty's rough hand resting on her tiny fingers, smiling. "This piece is our secret. It tells my story. One day you'll play it for the world." The music surged, then softened. A tear rolled down Amelia's cheek, but her fingers held steady. She wasn't playing for a wager. She was playing for a promise. Dr. Chun opened his eyes, pulled out his phone, and began recording. He whispered, "The world must see this. No one will silence Betty again." A few guests discreetly wiped their tears. They were beginning to realize this was no performance. This was justice, hammered into existence through piano keys. Amelia finished the first page, every note precise. The hall exploded in tense silence. Everyone knew she had cleared the bar Eleanor had set. But Amelia did not stop. She turned to the next page, then the next. Pages never published. She didn't need to pause. She remembered them from the years her grandmother had taught her. A man blurted, horrified, "My God, she knows the rest too." A woman gasped, "Impossible. Who could have taught her the rest?" Eleanor sprang up, her voice tearing through the air. "Stop! Who allowed you to play that? Who taught you?" But Amelia kept going. Her fingers flowed on like a river breaking its banks. If an orphan girl could recall notes never released, then who was the true heir of this composition? Dr. Chun turned to Eleanor, his eyes blazing. "Eleanor, this isn't your family's legacy. This is Betty's voice left behind." The music poured forth, unstoppable. Notes buried for years now roared in the gilded hall. One question lingered in the air. If truth could be awakened by music, what else was waiting to be revealed? The final note faded, falling into a silence so dense it seemed to thicken the air. No one dared to clap. No one even dared to breathe too loudly. Amelia sat still, her hands resting on the keys, then slowly rose to her feet. Eleanor burst out, her voice breaking. "Impossible! Who taught you that piece?" Amelia turned directly toward her. Her voice did not tremble. Each word struck the floor like a hammer. "The one who wrote it. My grandmother, Betty Washington." The hall exploded as if struck by lightning. A name unknown to some, but when spoken in the right place, it hit harder than any detonation. A guest blurted, "Betty who?" Another whispered, "Washington." "That sounds familiar." Eleanor stood frozen, her face drained, forcing a twisted smile. "You lie! This girl dares to spin tales just to steal the Vance family's glory?" But Dr. Chun stepped forward. He lifted the phone he had been recording with and raised it high. "Eleanor, this is no lie. Many years ago I studied music under Betty Washington herself. I was so captivated by this melody that she allowed me to copy a portion for study. I still have that copy, and it matches every note this girl just played." He held up the phone, its screen glowing with rows of faded musical notes. Those nearby pressed forward, breaths quickening as they peered closer. Eleanor let out a harsh laugh, though her lips trembled. Forgery! All of you are conspiring. A copied score proves nothing. Anyone could scribble a few notes. The noise in the hall swelled, but fewer and fewer seemed willing to believe her. Amelia stayed silent for a beat, then smiled faintly, more sorrow than triumph. You're right. Paper can be forged. But some things can never be faked. The room hushed again, eyes fixed on the small figure. Amelia stepped to the piano, laying her hand gently on its polished wood. My grandmother composed this piece. On this very piano. It isn't just an instrument. It is the home of every note. Eleanor snapped, Shut up! This piano belongs to my family. Amelia nodded, her voice calm but unyielding. If that's true, then you must know its secret. She pointed at the G key of the fourth octave. Right here, there's a tiny scratch. I made it when I was 8 years old, practicing with my grandmother. No one who hasn't lived with this piano would know. The hall held its breath. Some guests craned their necks, but then turned to Marcus. Amelia lifted her gaze to meet the guard's eyes. Mr. Marcus, will you check for me? Marcus hesitated. He knew he stood on the edge between his employer and the truth. But Amelia's eyes held his, so clear they left him no escape. He swallowed hard, bent down, and ran his finger along the G key. A pause. Then his body stiffened. Marcus straightened, his voice heavy but certain. Yes, there is a scratch. Very small but real. A wave of murmurs swept the hall. Guests who had reveled in ridicule now looked at each other in grim silence. Laughter was easy. Facing the truth in silence was harder. Eleanor staggered, clutching her glass so tightly it shattered, shards scattering across the floor. No, impossible. All of this is staged. This piano. But then came a choked cry. Caden! He stood nearby, his face ghostly pale. His lips trembled, then words burst out like a dam breaking. Mother, I told you. I didn't want to do this. Eleanor whirled. Silence, Caden. He shook his head, tears streaming. You told me. That old woman was dead, and no one would ever remember her. You said no one would know, but now everyone does. The hall erupted. Chairs scraped. Voices rose in a storm of whispers. Some guests covered their mouths. Those who had laughed at Amelia now hung their heads, unable to meet her eyes. Eleanor stood rigid, her gaze unfocused as if she might collapse. But no one reached out to steady her. Caden sobbed, his confession echoing through the grand hall. A few guests hurriedly looked away, fussing with their glasses or staring into their phones, unwilling to witness more. Others bowed their heads, avoiding Eleanor's stare. In that heavy silence, she sank into a chair, her mask of power shattered beneath the chandeliers. Amelia remained standing, small yet resolute, facing the entire hall. She did not smile, did not gloat. She simply placed her hand on the piano, whispering softly as if to someone unseen, Grandma, I kept my promise. Music had revealed the first truth. But how many more secrets still waited to be uncovered? News traveled faster than any melody. Just hours after the banquet, social media was flooded with videos of Amelia playing Requiem for a Sparrow and Caden's tearful confession. Who is this girl? Has the legacy been stolen all these years? Question followed question, and no one believed in the image of Saint Eleanor anymore. A major newspaper ran the headline, The Vance Foundation, Nurture or Conceal. Eleanor came under investigation. Sponsors withdrew. Doors that once opened wide to her slammed shut, one after another. No court ruling was needed. Society had already passed judgment. Meanwhile, Amelia was invited to a special hearing by the Music Council. Dr. Chun stood beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. He confirmed, Yes, I studied music under Betty Washington. She gave me a handwritten copy of this work for reference, and what Amelia played that night matched it, note for note. Marcus, the security guard, also stepped forward to testify. His words were simple. I checked the scratch on the piano key with my own eyes. It was exactly as the girl described. The council nodded. A judge declared, The piano and the composition Requiem for a Sparrow are hereby recognized as the rightful property of Betty Washington and her descendants. Amelia Washington is acknowledged as the legal heir. A sigh escaped Amelia's lips, not because of victory, but because her grandmother's name had finally been spoken aloud. The music community, moved by the story, quickly rallied. We need a new foundation, the Betty Washington Legacy Fund, so that forgotten talents will never again be silenced. Amelia became its honorary ambassador, even at just 13. She gazed at the newly raised golden plaque, Betty Washington Legacy Fund. In her eyes, her grandmother was smiling. 6 months later, Carnegie Hall blazed with light. Crowds packed the entrance, waiting as if for a miracle. In the green room, Amelia sat still, her hands resting on a simple white dress. Not luxurious, just a gift from a designer touched by her story. Dr. Chun entered with a kind smile. "Ready, Amelia?" She nodded, though her voice trembled. "I'm afraid I'll fail." Chun placed his hands on an imaginary keyboard on the table. "No, you don't play to prove yourself. You play to tell your grandmother's story. Remember that." When Amelia stepped onto the stage, the hall held its breath. Eleanor had once boasted in the St. Regis ballroom, but this was a place where music allowed no lies. Amelia sat before the Fazioli, the very same piano, now rightfully returned. She set her hands down, eyes closed. One note rang, then two, then a torrent of sound. Requiem for a Sparrow, never before performed in full, soared into the world for the first time. The audience wept from the very first chords. A man whispered, "This music, it isn't just to hear, it's to remember, to believe." No one saw Amelia as a street girl anymore. They saw Betty alive within her, a living legacy. When the piece ended, the hall was silent. No one clapped at first. Then, like a wave, the entire audience rose. Applause thundered so fiercely that the ceiling shook. Dr. Chun wiped his tears, bowing low. He whispered to himself, "Betty, you've finally come home." Amelia bowed, but in her heart, she knew. This was not her triumph alone. This was the triumph of music, of truth. After the concert, as the audience dispersed, Dr. Chun approached and handed Amelia an envelope. "Someone sent this for you." She opened it. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. Eleanor Vance. She read silently. "I will not apologize. I do not regret stealing. But you should know the truth. My father-in-law did not collect that piano. He won it in a card game from a jazz club manager. That man had received the piano and the manuscript from Betty Washington as collateral for a debt she could never repay. Your grandmother was not just a victim. She was desperate too. She gambled. She traded. Do not make her a saint. She was human, and humans sometimes do what they hate in order to survive." Amelia clenched the letter. The world hailed her grandmother as a legend, but the truth was more complicated. Dr. Chun looked at her gently and said, "People don't need to be perfect to deserve remembrance. What matters is what they leave behind." Amelia sat alone on the empty stage, the letter in her hand, the piano before her. She thought of her grandmother, a poor black woman, both an artist and a struggler in an unjust world. She had left behind not just melodies, but also pain, resilience, and hope. Amelia whispered, "Grandma, I won't let your story be only about despair. I'll carry it forward, with music, with my own life." She placed her fingers on the keys and let a short melody flow, not the requiem, but new notes, her own. The question lingers for the audience. If even legends have shadows, then is the true value of a legacy found in perfection, or in its power to inspire the next generation to write a new chapter? This is why Toch Story exists. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to spread stories that touch the heart.